If you're interested in knowing the greatest band of all time better, the music and the magic behind the Beatles, we're your dedicated channel. So make sure to like the video, hit subscribe and that bell notification as we tackle all things Beatles with new videos every week. Not many Gen Z know about the Beatles, so I'm going to start with an introduction. Let's start with their personalities first. John, Paul, George and Ringo all had charisma. Back then, they were the real deal, and you cannot compare them to anyone, even to the mainstream acts nowadays. Yeah, of course, other acts had their own personalities, but they were created for them by labels, unlike the Beatles, who did it themselves. When it comes down to music, there was someone to back them up, Sir George Martin. George wasn't just a producer, but a facilitator. He did teach many things and put their talents into work while allowing the group to develop them. He had helped them to realize their full potential as musicians. George Martin's close involvement with the Beatles and his role as a producer earned him the moniker the Fifth Beatle. He realized the significance of the band's sessions in the recording studio in between other demands on their time, later saying, coming into the studio was a refuge for them. It was the time and place where nobody could get at them. The strange hours for their sessions were really necessary because of the frenetic life they were forced into. Recording was important, but it had to be squeezed in between everything else. As he worked with the band, Martin brought his classical musical training to bear. They were initially unenthusiastic when he suggested adding a string quartet accompaniment to Yesterday, but the result was a revelation to them. Martin began to use the sessions to act as their music teacher, and this, coupled with his willingness to experiment with suggestions they started to make, such as adding something baroque, enabled their creativity to develop in new directions. As well as scoring orchestral arrangements for Beatles recordings, Martin was frequently numbered among the performers, playing instruments including piano, organ and brass. The musical influences they had were also a big factor in their success. Paul and John grew up listening to classical tunes, Motown and rock and roll, and admittedly stole ideas from these musical styles to experiment and improve by getting the best out of them. The results were a huge success, as they have built the most unique sound there is during those times, both catchy and vibrant. And finally, the Beatles had two musical geniuses who serve as the lead vocalist, Paul McCartney and John Lennon. They did something which was unheard of back then, and still to this very day. Not to mention they were both incredible composers and very talented musicians. Basically, people love the Beatles because of 6 major factors: charisma, the compositions, musical growth, creativity, the boldness, and the main factors, John Lennon and Paul McCartney. These two, combined with George Harrison and Ringo Starr, completed a full package band and turned everything they created into something incredible with a great groove and feel. They evolved into something incredible. Legends. The Fabulous Four revolutionized the sound, style and attitude of popular music and opened rock and roll doors to a tidal wave of British rock acts. Their initial impact would have been enough to establish the Beatles as one of their era's most influential cultural forces, but they didn't stop there. Although their initial style was a highly original, irresistibly catchy synthesis of early American rock and roll and R&B, the Beatles spent the rest of the 1960s expanding rock's stylistic frontiers, consistently staking out new musical territory on each release. The band's increasingly sophisticated experimentation encompassed a variety of genres, including folk rock, country and baroque pop, without sacrificing the effortless mass appeal of their early work. Even though the Beatles are considered the best, they still drew influence from people around them. The band's earliest influences include Elvis Presley, Little Richard and Chuck Berry, an artist whose songs they covered more often than any other in performances throughout their career. During their co-residency with Little Richard at the Star Club in Hamburg from April to May 1962, friendships were formed and the singer gave advice regarding techniques for performing his songs. Lennon said, "Nothing affected me until I heard Elvis. If there hadn't been Elvis, there would not have been the Beatles." Other early influences include Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran, Carl Perkins and Roy Orbison. The Beatles continued to absorb influences long after their initial success, often finding new musical and lyrical avenues by listening to their contemporaries, including Bob Dylan, Frank Zappa, Freak Out, The Byrds and the Beach Boys, whose album Pet Sounds amazed and inspired McCartney. Originating as a skiffle group, the Beatles soon evolved to embrace 1950s rock and roll. As rock and roll faded and Tin Pan Alley's influence resurfaced in the 1960s, the band's repertoire expanded to include pop. Demonstrating other styles explored by the group, Lennon said of the 1964 album Beatles for Sale, "You could call our new one a Beatles country and western LP." While AllMusic cite the Beatles as a major influence on the Byrds and the folk rock movement, calling the 1965 Rubber Soul one of the classic folk rock records. Beginning with the use of a string quartet in the 1965 romantic ballad Yesterday, they started to incorporate elements of classical music into their songs. It was pointed out that it was obviously not the first romantic ballad the Beatles ever recorded, nor was Yesterday even remotely the first pop record of making prominent use of strings, although it was the first Beatles recording to do so. Yesterday did not represent some sort of compositional quantum leap on the part of the Beatles. It was rather than the more traditional sound of strings that allow for a fresh appreciation of their talent as composers by listeners who were otherwise allergic to the din of drums and electric guitars. The band's stylistic range began to include psychedelic rock in 1966 with Rain, described by Martin Strong in the Great Rock Discography as the first overtly psychedelic Beatles record, and later followed by Tomorrow Never Knows, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Strawberry Fields Forever, and I Am the Walrus. The influence of Indian classical music was also evident in the band's ragga rock numbers such as Love to You, 1966, and Within You Without You, 1967. A Day in the Life encapsulates the art and achievement of the Beatles as well as any single track can. It highlights key features of their music, the sound imagination, the persistence of tuneful melody, and the close coordination between words and music. It represents a new category of song, more sophisticated than pop, more accessible and down-to-earth than pop, and uniquely innovative. There literally had never been a song, classical or vernacular, that had blended so many disparate elements so imaginatively. Another legend, Bruce Ellis Benson, agrees, saying in his The Improvisation of Musical Dialogue, a Phenomenology of Music, composers may be able to conceive new rhythms and chord progressions, but these are usually improvisations upon current rhythms and chord progressions. The Beatles give us a wonderful example of how such far-ranging influences as Celtic music, rhythm and blues, and country and western could be put together in a new way. In the songwriting secrets of the Beatles, Dominic Pedler too drew attention to the way the Beatles combine genres but emphasizes the effect it has on their musical evolution, saying, "One of the greatest of the Beatles' achievements was the songwriting juggling act they managed for most of their career. Far from moving sequentially from one genre to another, as is sometimes conveniently suggested, the group maintained in parallel their mastery of the traditional catchy chart hit while simultaneously forging rock and dabbling with a wide range of peripheral influences from country to vaudeville." One of these threads was their take on folk music, which would form such essential groundwork for their later collisions with Indian music and philosophy. As the relationship of the band waned, their individual influences became more apparent. The minimalist cover artwork for the Beatles, 1968, contrasted with the complexity and diversity of the album's music, which encompassed Lennon's music Concrete Composition Revolution 9 from the influence of Yoko Ono, Starr's country song Don't Pass Me By, Harrison's rock ballad While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and the roaring proto-metal of McCartney's Helter Skelter. The Beatles took innovative approaches to the use of technology, treating the studio as an instrument in itself and working closely with recording engineers, urging experimentation and regularly demanding, "Just try it, it might just sound good." At the same time, they constantly sought ways to put chance occurrences to creative use, examples being accidental guitar feedback, a resonating glass bottle, or a tape loaded the wrong way round so that it played backward and incorporated the resulting sounds into their music. The Beatles' desire to create new sounds on every new recording, combined with Martin's arranging abilities and the studio expertise of EMI staff engineers such as Norman Smith, Ken Townsend, and Jeff Emerick, all played significant parts in the innovative sounds of the albums Rubber Soul, 1965, Revolver, 1966, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967. Along with studio tricks such as sound effects, unconventional microphone placements, tape loops, double tracking, and vari-speed recording, the Beatles began to augment their recordings with instruments that were unconventional for rock music at the time. These included string and brass ensembles, as well as Indian instruments such as the sitar in Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, and the swar mandol in Strawberry Fields Forever. They also used early electronic instruments such as the mellotron, with which McCartney supplied the flute voices on the intro to Strawberry Fields Forever, and the clavioline, an electronic keyboard that created the unusual oboe-like sound on Baby You're a Rich Man. There you have it all, guys. Drop a thumb up in the comment section. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons if you've not done that, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. The handles are in the description box below.